who suffer greatly at the hands of kangaroo courts on college campuses, and to the detriment of young men and as well young women. Their reputations are destroyed, their futures are destroyed, the opportunities for economic prosperity in the future destroyed. And it's only because the law allows it. So I want to talk with you tonight because a lot of people might think I'm just making, a big deal out of a few small,
Crazy.
stuff happens, Ken. But this is a very serious matter. If you could explain to us what SAVE does first and foremost, and what you do at SAVE.
Yeah, absolutely. SAVE is a nonpartisan organization. It's nonprofit. And so it's not Republican, it's not Democrat. It is for the benefit of the people so that they can be educated about different events and different laws that are going on that are affecting them, and primarily due process laws. And what they've done in regard to Title IX is focus heavily, excuse me, on the due process aspect of that. And like you already said, the kangaroo courts, and trying to stop that from a political standpoint, as well as what I'm doing today, which is, educating people about what's going on in the universities and the college campuses across the United States.
Michelle, I'm a young man who's about to send his young man off to school. I mean, I've watched him play football on campus, SATs, and he's filled out all the paperwork, going to school on a scholarship. And he arrives the first day of school. Is my son safe at that school?
Well, I would say no, and this is the reason why. He's not safe because he's walking into a biased situation regarding Title IX that he probably gets very little education about. The girls will get education, the boys will get education, but the girls will get more. And that is done through various processes. It's different at every school. But what they don't tell the boys when they introduce them to, college life and introduce them to the handbook is that the definition of rape and assault on college campuses is different than the legal definition, and that you are presumed guilty. They say you're not, but you are presumed guilty when you are charged with any type of sexual assault. Additionally, you can be charged. They've given a loaded weapon to with Title IX. You can be charged at any time for your entire 4 years there or after you leave. And it doesn't have a time frame at most schools within which a woman has to charge you. So I have cases where the woman has said 18 months ago, you raped me, and I'm just now coming forward. And that's perfectly allowed under their policy.
I got to ask you here, Michelle, you are a great attorney in your own right and have protected a
Thank
lot
you.
of young people from the sinews of kangaroo courts. But I'm quite certain that the college knows that this is going on and will provide representation to my son just like any other place, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. Well, in a way, let me tell you what they'll do. They'll tell you that you can have an advisor. They'll provide you with an advisor, and that's all you're allowed to have, by the way. And I'm obviously an attorney, and I act as an attorney slash advisor when I do these cases. And also, I'm a therapist, and I probably do more therapy than anything else, to be honest
Yeah.
with you, because it's a very stressful situation. But the advisor does not get to speak for the student. They're there for emotional support. So all of the work that I do is kind of behind the scenes. I prepare my student like I'm preparing him for a deposition, like I'm preparing him for questioning by a very harsh, aggressive attorney from the other side that does not have his interests in mind, because that's really the way I feel that the interviews and the investigations are conducted. They are not conducted with fairness in mind or with your son in mind. They're conducted with a goal, and the goal is we have a report filed. We're afraid of the federal government taking our federal funding away under Title IX, so we're going to make sure and check all of our boxes, and we want to find a lot of these guys guilty, because if we don't, we're afraid that the women will complain to the Department of Education. And that's what the schools are most afraid of.
You keep saying Title IX, Title IX, Title IX. My son or my daughter is protected by the U.S. Constitution, right?
Yeah, not. So you would think. Let me tell you, the biggest part of this is that due process is going away. This is the erosion of due process with these kangaroo courts, and it's trickling down from our colleges to our workplaces to every other venue in our society. And when you take away due process, you have a kangaroo court country, and that's what we are all most afraid of. But you ask if your son is protected by the Constitution. Well, he's not in this situation because he's not being charged criminally. He's being charged administratively by the school. And there are case laws that say that the courts try to stay out of what the schools do, absent extraordinary circumstances. And there are some things that you can do, and there are some lawsuits you can file under Title IX. But generally speaking, when you go into this situation, your son is basically on his own in an administrative hearing where he has to provide the evidence to prove usually a negative, because usually what he's charged with, he did not do. And that's very difficult to prove when you didn't do it. And especially if you're trying to do it on your own. But because he's not losing his liberty, he's not going to jail, he's not going to be fined, then there's no constitutional protection that really applies, even at a state school.
Now, he's not protected by the Constitution. So apparently, this must be some very complex thing that my son did on campus. It had to be egregious. So I should really come down hard on my son, right?
Well, it is complex. Once you hear how they charge it and what they do, you'll be like pulling your hair out. But no, do not come down hard on your son. And what I tell most people is, when you hear that someone's been charged with sexual assault on a college campus, first of all, it's not, when they say sexual assault and rape, it's not the same definition of sexual assault and rape that you have legally and criminally. I mean, when you hear that definition for a criminal act, that's very different than what the charge is on a college campus. So no, you should not come down hard on your son. There's almost no way to protect yourself if you are an accused student. I mean, I'm not sure. I can't give you 100% way to protect yourself, because I've had students who have gone on dates and not had sex and been charged with sexual assault. So,
Wow.
what do you do? Because normally what you have is a situation where the sex is consensual, and the argument is from one party, usually the girl, that it was not consensual. But I've had more than one case where the argument is, he kissed me and I didn't want to be kissed, or he had sex with me and there was no sex at all, where he bothered me because he called me twice. He touched me on the head. These are all valid things to file a complaint for under Title IX. And, in one of my cases, the student was said to be stalking the girl because he was always following her to class. Well, he had the same class. I mean, their schedules just coincided. He happened to be going the same way. It's like, really? I mean, it's
It cannot. It cannot be that silly. It can't be that silly.
It really is. But it's not silly to the boys, though, because they have been charged in their mind with a criminal act. And they sit there and think, what did I do? Oh my gosh. And if they had sex, they're questioning, was it consensual? I thought it was. Did I do something that's morally repugnant to me? So, that's where the therapy aspect of what I do comes in, because they get depressed. They have no support system, most of them. If you send your son away to college, he's going to be away from his main support system he's had for his entire life for the first time ever, probably. And this is the hardest thing he's probably ever had to deal with. Not always, but for most students, it's the first big thing they've had to address. And if they try to do it alone, they've kind of fall apart. And the school offers counseling. And how much do you think the boys trust the school at this point?
Exactly. Now, I'm quite certain this kind of stuff happens with the brothers at the fraternity, you know, and it happens with the football team, you know, the basketball team. It can only happen with those guys, right?
Well, no, it can happen with anyone. I just had an interview where the other host said that it's mainly the Chads. Have you heard that term, the
Yeah.
Chads? That so he said he thinks that it's mainly the Chads that are getting accused. I said, well, I think it is the Chads and then another group of boys that are maybe a little bit less socially mature. They don't read social cues as well. They have less experience with girls and dating. So maybe they don't call the girl back right away. Maybe they don't know how to, say they had a good time when they went out. Maybe they go out with two girls in one night and they don't read the social cues that that's not okay with the first girl, like they tell them. So it's those two groups, and one of them even is on the Asperger's, can be on the Asperger's
Yes.
scale a little bit as far as not reading social cues. And I think that's a real problem because you have a mix of a disability along with this Title IX accusation. And, those kids in no way meant to do anything that would scare a girl or hurt a girl. They just didn't read the social cues. But it can happen to anyone and everyone. And I've seen an athlete, I've seen, non-athletes, I've seen cool kids, normal kids, nerdy kids. It can happen to anyone, literally. Because what happens is the girls are educated about Title IX, sexual assault, over and over from different venues, whether it's their sorority, whether it's Sexual Assault Awareness Day on campus, which they have at least 2 times a year. And what they tell these girls in a lot of schools is that if you've had a sexual encounter that you feel uncomfortable with, that bothered you, that you didn't feel right about, then it was sexual assault. And that is a very scary thing to tell girls because a lot of them, I think today, really think they were assaulted when they weren't. They
Exactly.
Because they had, maybe a bad experience. Well, that happens. We all know it does.
Exactly. I mean, who hasn't had a bad date? I can't think of anybody unless it's a nun. Couldn't possibly
Who
have had a
hasn't
bad.
been a date? So,
Exactly. We've all had bad dates. But say, for instance, my son picks up the phone and he calls me. He says, "Dad, listen, I wasn't doing anything. I just happened to bump into her in the classroom, and then the next thing I know, the professor said I sexually assaulted her. They're talking about throwing me out of school. Should I get a detective now to follow up on this case?"
well, I do use private investigators sometimes, but what you should get is an attorney who is a specialist in Title IX because it's a very specialized niche and it's law than any other type of law. Because you can't do the same things. For instance, criminal attorneys will tell you not to speak because obviously in the criminal realm, if you have the right to remain silent. Well, if you remain silent in Title IX, under the school's rules, you will be found guilty because you have to defend yourself. And if you don't, you're going to be found guilty because the only party's information they'll take is the girls. And it's basically everything she said is presumed true. And the other thing is the standard of evidence is defined as preponderance of the evidence, but they have it wrong. They define it as 50% and a feather. Okay, that's not the real definition of preponderance of the evidence.
Oh
A
my.
preponderance of the evidence is what a normal person, most people would think happened. If you are pretty sure that a reasonable person would find this person guilty, it's not clear and convincing where you're almost positive, and it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. But it is more than 50% in a feather. You can't really define it with a percentage term. That's the first thing you learn in law school is never try to define that as a percentage because it's not. But think about what they're saying. 50% and a feather. A feather. So a feather weight is going to determine if your son assaulted this girl, if she's lying or if he's lying. And that's just very difficult. That standard for anyone is very difficult.
Well, the good thing about all this is at least we know who accused my son, right?
Okay, well, you usually do know these days. Before you didn't. Before Betsy DeVos withdrew the 2011, there was a, not to get too technical about everything, but there was a Dear Colleague letter in 2011 that started kind of morphing Title IX into something that doesn't deal with equality in sports and in programming in schools, but creates a situation where an assault is considered discrimination, basically. So anyway, I forgot my train of thought. I'm sorry. Where was I?
Yeah, but along the lines of the fact that um, I forgot my train of thought.
I know you just right.
it's but in this particular case, that the young man has to prove that he didn't do something that he's being accused of. Uh, when we go back to the whole idea of the kid getting ready to cross the stage and get his degree, is it possible for someone to do whatever is necessary to prevent him from crossing that stage with this accusation?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, these accusations, that's what happens, is these kids are prevented from graduating, from finishing their schooling, or from receiving their diploma. And sometimes even after the fact, these kids are charged and diploma is taken back from them. So it is definitely possible. I mean, and I said before that we've given women a loaded gun in the hand, in the view of Title IX. We've handed them this rule that says if you get angry with any girl or guy on campus, you can Title IX them. I mean, they use it as a verb now, and you can do this, and then they have to prove themselves innocent.
So let me ask you here. Say, for instance, bad date, they hate each other. 6 or 7 months later, after the kid's been accused, she comes back to the professor and says, let's squash this. I love him. I messed up. We're back together. I want to squash this. Does that eliminate the case?
Well, sometimes. It depends on where the case is. If it's done soon enough, then yes. Under the new rules that Betsy DeVos has, and I think that's where I was going before,
Yes.
The 2011 rules were rescinded by Betsy DeVos,
Yes.
and some interim rules were put in place. And we're waiting right now for the new permanent regulations to be put in place. But under the new guidelines, the parties can work something out. They can do alternate resolution and work something out. And I've done that often in my cases where we both work out where we're not going to talk about each other. We're never going to talk about this to anyone. And we'll have a permanent no contact order. Because at that point, the accused student definitely wants a no contact order from the girl. And the girl usually doesn't mind, or vice versa. So that's usually what happens. But if you've waited until there's already been a decision made, even if you haven't gotten to the appeal, if you've already made a decision, then it's too late. And you can't undo it. You can't unring the bell. They're in trouble and it's going to stay.
So how come my kid can't pick up the phone and call the sheriff's office and say, I'm being accused of a crime. I didn't do it. I want to come in and I want to put this on the record?
Because he's not been accused of a crime. And that's the problem, and no boy, and my husband and I argue about this sometimes because he says no guy ever wants to take the chance that the police would get involved because on a sexual assault or rape charge, because that's just, you could go to jail. You never know what could happen. But the problem is that they're not actually charged. And if they were charged in almost every one of the cases that I've dealt with, it would have been thrown out immediately because there's no evidence. Exactly. Or because the girl. And while in some situations that could happen, it's very rare. And where you see where you date your rapist is if you're married to him. That's normally, or you're in a domestic relationship where you can't really get out. You literally don't have the money to leave. But these are college students, and completely different. They are supported by their parents usually or on grants, and they live in different places. They have their own ability to leave, come and go. So there's no trapped in, they're not trapped into a relationship. And so to treat those like it's a domestic situation is it's a bad analogy to use. And the
Exactly.
schools use that.
Can I take us out for a moment? Take us out of the campus environment, and I want every kid right now, every parent. You're going to be inundated. Every parent who's sending their child to school in the new year need to pick up the phone, need to get in contact with Save. How can they do that so that their sons, especially, and forgive my bias, but their sons are protected once they arrive on campus?
They can reach SAVE through saveservices.org. And let me say it again, saveservices.org. SAVE has a great website with all kinds of information about Title IX and anything else that might affect anyone and their due process rights, but especially Title IX. So I would encourage everyone to go onto that. And there are a couple of other websites too that I give my students that are support websites. There's one called FACE, Families Advocating for Campus Equality. And that is a supportive group where you can see that you're not alone. There are other people who have been charged, and you can find people to talk to that have been through this, people to give you advice, give you direction. If you don't know how to find a lawyer, you can find lawyers on that website. So that's a really good one too. But everyone should learn about Title IX before they send their kids to college. They should study up on it and find out what it really is and educate their daughters and their sons about it. Because their daughters need to be the proponent of, we are not so weak that we can't say no in a situation and walk away when we need to. Because the way it's set up right now, the girls are considered the weaker vessel. And if there's any alcohol involved, then the girl is
Wow.
presumed not to be able to take care of herself. And it's not the same for the guy. Why is it that way? I mean, we're taking the women's movement back 50 years because we're now saying that women are not strong enough to take up for themselves, to make smart decisions, to make a good decision about when to leave a situation.
Now, I'll take us out into the pop world for a moment because I'm so intrinsically down with the young people. I know all this stuff.
Yeah, you knew what a dad was. So.
But apparently this week, or last week, in fact, Keisha, the singer, received a claim to pay defamation
She was charged with defamation, right?
Yeah, to Dr. Luke, because she stated that Katy Perry had been raped by Dr. Luke, and that was not the case at all. So he's going to win $367,000 or more. It's been appealed, and so they'll go through all of the laborious efforts. But should men today in a Me Too movement fight when a woman says that he raped her?
Well, that is another it's a very timely question, because this is something that I am dealing with right now, trying to decide when and where to file defamation suits and what the downside is, what the upside is. Personally, I want to file them. Every time I have a girl who lies, I want to file a defamation suit, because they won't be able to prove, the truth is the only defense. So they won't be able to prove it's true, because when you have the circumstantial evidence of a woman who did not report something, waited 18 months to bring it up, or, in Keisha and Perry's case, somebody else reported it. She didn't even report it. Mm-hmm. And there's no physical evidence. They didn't go to the police or the hospital. Then you're going to win that defamation suit, because there's going to be no ability to prove that it was the truth. I mean, there's a little bit of a burden shift when you get to defamation, because you prove that it didn't happen, which means that the other side has to prove it did. And they can't, because there's literally, even if it had happened, they wouldn't be able to prove it, which is why they didn't go to the police in the first place. So I think that a defamation suit would stop this. I think it would stop women who have not really been sexually assaulted from abusing the system. Because remember, there are people who have been raped. There are people who
Yes.
have been assaulted. And those people need to have the benefit of it not being tainted. There haven't been too many women who've cried wolf. They need to be treated with respect because they have actually been through a trauma, where what we have on college campuses is not the same. Now, I still don't think that anyone should be believed before the investigation. You should be believed by your pastor, by your counselor, by your friend, by your parents, but you should not be believed by your judge or your investigator. All they should do is collect facts and make a decision based on those facts. So this whole believe the victim sounds nice, but it's a really bad idea because it takes away due process from that man who's accused or that woman who's accused. And there are women who are accused, either in same-sex situations or because the men accuse them. And it does happen. But, you get back to the whole kangaroo court system that you have in colleges. And so because it's such a kangaroo court, I love nothing better than taking one of these accusers into real court. I've done it recently, and it was literally the best day of my life because it was a woman, and she just lost it because she stood up and yelled at the judge and interrupted the judge. She has no idea how real court should work because she's used to the school just pandering to her. And I mean, I have 17-year-olds that would have never acted that way in a courtroom. They would have known better than to interrupt a judge on a bench. Just the fact that he's on a bench, you inherently know you can't stand up and interrupt him. But that woman was put in jail. I mean, for contempt of court because he asked her 3 times to be quiet, and she just couldn't handle the fact that it wasn't all going her way. So to me, I want to charge him, but I'm aggressive.
Exactly. But, and that's encouragement for a lot of men who feel as if they are Weingartner when they are not. They,
Right.
They're questioning, they're second guessing. Did I do something? And they've lost their confidence, which affects
And
them
nice guys
in the
do that.
classroom.
Nice guys feel horrible that they've been charged with this, and they try to figure out what they did wrong. And sometimes I'm telling them you did nothing wrong other than you didn't call her back or you broke up with her. That's what you did wrong. And that's life.
Exactly. Michelle, you are tremendous. We're going to have you come back again. Every football coach in America, because I want to say this, I might be wrong, but that is a gun against your economic head. When a woman has the power to accuse and be victorious, it can change everything financially for you. Football players being thrown out of school because someone accused them and losing their scholarships and things. So that's tremendous.
Absolutely.
How can people get in contact with you again?
The easiest way to reach me, because my website is a little bit tricky spelling, is just to Google Michelle Owens, attorney, Nashville.
Bingo.
Nashville, Tennessee, the new It City.
Exactly. One of the great cities of America. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Michelle. We look forward to your return to our program.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, it scares the bejeebers out of me. I couldn't imagine going to college now, and I couldn't imagine sending a child to college now with how the left have turned this into no longer a constitutional society, but a democratic mob. And when we find that kangaroo court on college campuses, I would be scared. I would want to take all my classes in my dorm room. That's the way I would want to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with more of the best right after this.